Today's atheists are the new religious fundamentalists.
And I'm constantly discovering things, especially in this debate about whether Jesus is claimed to be God or not. There are all, Christians often look at me like I've said that a square has three sides when I say Jesus didn't claim to be God, because it's like this obvious fact of the Gospels. In biblical scholarship for the past few hundred years, it's been mainstream just to say that Jesus didn't actually historically claim to be God.
In the 20th century, biblical literalism was the identifying marker of a religious fundamentalist. And so you'd hear arguments like, if the Bible says it, I believe it. And this was an overly simplistic interpretive method that emphasized Scripture's literalism to the neglect of the literary devices used throughout the texts. Today's atheists functionally make the same argument to the negative degree. So they say, well, the Gospels never show Jesus say the words, I am God, and therefore they believe it. Jesus never claimed to be God. But is that really an honest reading of narrative? Take Shrek, for example. Is this scene Shrek or Lord of the Rings? Is this Shrek or Spider-Man? Is this Shrek or The Matrix? What Hollywood is doing in this film is they're making connections based on the assumption that you know The Lord of the Rings, Spider-Man, or The Matrix. In other words, no one needs to tell you that Shrek is recapitulating those movies. They're banking on the knowledge that the audience has. This is how the gospel writers are presenting Jesus as God. If you know your Old Testament, you recall that in Genesis 1, God splits the seas. In the days of Noah, God floods the earth. In the great Exodus, God parts the Red Sea. To defeat the armies of Sisera, God uses a river. In Psalm 29, the Lord is seen as sitting enthroned over the flood. In Psalm 107, God's great end-time deliverance is portrayed as sailors at sea tossed to and fro, and God commands the winds and the waters to still, and they stop. And so when Mark presents Jesus in the boat with his disciples, and the sea and the winds overtake them, when Jesus commands the winds to be still and it all stops, Mark is banking on the fact that you know your Old Testament. In other words, you can't just read the scriptures like a child of the Enlightenment who arbitrarily assumes standards of literary verificationism. The gospel writers assume you know the Old Testament, and thus Mark assumes you have enough information when he shows Jesus calm the winds and the waves and the disciples ask the question, who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? For those who know the Old Testament, the answer is pretty clear.